Business as usual is quite unusual in 2021. Some companies are busier than ever, endeavoring to keep up with demand. Others long for a return of a rush, of a full house, of the simple ability to stand shoulder to shoulder. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we do business. Some of those changes may be permanent. Some may go away in the near future. Unfortunately, for now, there's a lot we don't know. The challenges are many, and not all of them can be blamed on a virus. Housing shortages, workforce gaps, inequality, a variety of social and economic issues challenged us before the pandemic reached the Lilac City. But we are Spokane. We are Coeur d'Alene. We are the Inland Northwest. We are nothing if not caring, resilient, and resourceful. At the Journal of Business, we endeavor to keep you, our readers, informed on what's happening in your community. Our staff is dedicated to providing you with objective information on news and trends, with the goal of ultimately helping you to be more successful in your chosen path. It's time to go beyond sound bites. It's time for more depth than 140 characters can provide. It's time for elevating the conversation.
Good afternoon and welcome to Elevating the Conversation. My name is Paul Reed. I'm privileged to serve as publisher of the Journal of Business. And I'm thrilled today that 380 of you signed up for this important conversation. It says a lot about our community. You know, we launched this series because we listened to you. You told us you wanted to have a venue where we could have important conversations about issues facing our community, really, and especially our business community. So we've done just that. In January, we welcomed Public Facilities District CEO Stephanie Curran to talk about the hospitality industry in an inhospitable world of COVID. Last month, we brought in Dr. Frank Velazquez, Interim Health Director for the Spokane Regional Health District. And he talked to us about vaccines and really the road ahead, which we're on now. Next month, we'll have prominent Spokane developer Jim Frank here for a discussion about affordability and availability in what we all know is a very tight housing market, perhaps even a crisis. And in May, we have Washington Trust Bank economist Steve Scranton for a mid-year report and maybe a glimpse about what a post-pandemic economy looks like for us. And we have many more great topics coming up after that through the summer and fall. We hope you join us. But today, I'm very excited to have with us Kiantha Duncan, president of the NAACP here, and for a great conversation, I hope, about equity and diversity and inclusion in really a mostly white community, as we know. This is a topic that, although it should always be top of mind for us, certainly has become so in the past year or so. Here at the Journal, we think that's one of those critical conversations we must have in our community. And I personally believe that the business community needs to take a stronger role in that, at the table, taking a leadership position and making sure that we are doing the right things in our community. But before we get to any of that, I'd like to first thank this month's sponsor. We don't get to do these kinds of things without the generosity and support of some great community partners in Spokane. And this month, our sponsor is Canopy Credit Union. And we are so appreciative that they've made this possible today. And because we're still in COVID, we've got a video that we'd like to play for you on behalf of Canopy Credit Union. So let's take a look.
Hi, everyone. My name is Charlotte Nemec, and I am honored to be Canopy Credit Union's president and CEO. Many of us have become more aware of what racial discrimination is and how it is affecting our community. It's important to create brave spaces where we can have important and meaningful conversations like what Kiantha Duncan will be discussing today, and our community is going to be better as a result. As a white woman in a position of influence, I've struggled with what to say, how to say it, and when to say it. How can I possibly understand the pain and struggles that Black, Indigenous, and people of color experience? The answer is, I can't. But I can listen, I can learn, I can grow. And as a leader at Canopy Credit Union, I'm committed to leading our team to implement long-term, lasting change and be a part of creating a more inclusive community. Canopy Credit Union is and will continue to be a place for anyone who wants to grow their financial possibilities. We are committed to maintaining our efforts toward financial inclusion through our Community Development Financial Institution designation. We pledge to actively look for ways to improve internally and externally with our team, our members, and our community. If these are values that resonate with you, we invite you to become a part of our credit union family. We look forward to learning and growing with all of you. I want to personally thank the Journal of Business and Kiantha Duncan for hosting brave conversations like these. I'm thrilled to have Canopy Credit Union listen in and join this conversation with all of you. We are Canopy Credit Union. Here, you grow.
Welcome to Elevating the Conversation. My name is Lynn Parrish. I am the editor of the Journal of Business. I'm joined today by Kiantha Duncan, president of the NAACP Spokane.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you.
Glad you're here.
Absolutely.
I had this one circled on my calendar for a while.
Good. Me too. Me too. I didn't want to miss it. So this is good.
Before we get started, I want to mention a couple of things. One is we have a question and answer feature on the Zoom today. So please put your questions there after Kiantha and I get finished with our conversation. We'll take as many of your questions as we can.
Yes.
Also, I wanted to mention, just in case anybody was curious, if I may, Kiantha has been vaccinated. I have not. So we decided she's safe without a mask. I better keep my germs to myself. So that work for you?
That works for me. That works for me.
All right. So Kiantha, let's start with this.
Yes.
You have talked in the past about experiences. And I wanted to just open up the floor initially to you to talk about that.
Okay. So are we talking about the adverse childhood experiences, the TED Talk stuff, or experiences just here?
Well, so we
period?
talked about two things. We
Okay.
talked about personal and professional.
Yes.
On a most basic level. I'll let you start wherever you'd like to start.
So this is the thing that comes to mind first, Lynn. My experiences here professionally have been different than any place else that I've been, and different in some ways that are exciting and good, and then also challenging in some ways that I had not seen in other places. Eastern Washington is a beautiful place. Like physically, it is just a beautiful place to be. And I think the people here are friendly for the most part. However, you have lots of rooms that folks are just not used to seeing people of color in. So you have lots of boardrooms that people are not used to seeing people that look like me in, or meetings. I remember one of the things that I think was most challenging for me was I had accepted a position on the board of the Girl Scouts for Northern Idaho and Eastern Washington. And I love the Girl Scouts. I love what they do for organizations. I love what they do for girls, how much they teach the girls. It's just, I'm carried away. So I had gone to an event that we had, and I walked into the room where all of the girls were. And I was the only person of color in the room. And I just watched their little faces kind of like, what is going on? And so in that moment, I had to really accept that that is the reality for many people who live in Eastern Washington. Not that they're adverse to working with people of color or building relationship with people of color, but they just haven't because there's not a lot here. So that was just one of my very early experiences where I knew that Eastern Washington is a little different.
Sure, sure. I wrote an editorial last June talking about this issue. And one of the things that I said was, we're 89% white in Spokane County, and 2% Black. And so we shouldn't beat ourselves up about that, but we should acknowledge it. And we should take an active role as an entire community in issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is that an accurate assessment in your books?
It is absolutely accurate. And the one thing that is, I think people should take into consideration. So I like to give people lots of things to think about. So one of the things to think about in relation to that ratio of white versus African-American here in Spokane or Eastern Washington, it's never going to be a 50-50, city, or it's never going to be, I don't foresee Spokane having 60% white and 40% people of color. I don't foresee that ever happening just based on where we are regionally.
Sure.
But what can happen is for the 89% that are here, we can learn to coexist better together, and we can learn communication styles. We can learn what it's like to have neighbors of color, or have folks that are your coworkers, and just be in better relationship. That's what my hope is. It's not that the demographics of the city will change. It's that we will understand how to work within the structure that we have.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. So when you look at something like the Black Lives Matter movement, what do you see as the role of the entire community, or white people within the community, in that effort?
Lynn, you have some good questions. These are good. These are good questions, y'all. That is excellent. What is the role of white community in the Black Lives Matter movement? Excellent. Here is the simplest way to answer that. The role of white community is to acknowledge that Black lives matter as much as all lives matter. That Black lives matter as much as all lives matter. There was a event that happened down at the Wagon. It was one of the protests, and there was this woman who was standing on the sidewalk, and you could hear the people in the crowd from the protest saying, like, Black Lives Matter. And then after each time you hear Black Lives Matter, and then you hear White Lives Matter. And so I walked over to the woman and I said, tell me about this. Tell me about what it is that is making you feel like you need to say white lives matter also. Not upset with her. It's nothing to be upset about, but just wanting to understand. And so in that moment, we were able to have a conversation where she said, I feel like Black Lives Matter movement and marches say that my life as a white woman does not matter. And I said, that's absolutely not what it's saying. It's absolutely not what it's saying. It's saying that along with all of the other lives that have always mattered, Black Lives Matter too. And then she said, oh, I didn't think of it that way. And I invited her to come over to the march. She ended up staying the entire time at the march. And by the end, she was saying, Black Lives Matter, because she understood that that is actually the role for white people in community with other Blacks, is to be able to say that our lives are equally as important as anybody else's. Not more important, equally as important.
I'm paraphrasing and I might not get it right, but I've seen Katara Johnson post a phrase or a sentence that said, Black Lives Matter doesn't mean that your life hasn't been hard. It means that race isn't one of the reasons that your life has been difficult. Have you seen that? Or
I had not, but that's reasonable. Yeah. And I think we all, every person, every population, every culture, every community wants to be seen. They want to be seen, they want to be understood, and they want to be acknowledged and respected. And Black Lives Matter, that movement was really a continuation of the civil rights movement, which at the same time we're saying Black Lives Matter. And so there was something about the way in which it came out that people got really afraid of, and they really felt like, no, this means us versus them. And it's not that. It really is our lives matter. Your life matters, my life matters, your children's lives matter, and my children's lives matter. Same thing.
Sure,
yeah.
That makes sense. Apologies, I think I'm having some mic problems, so I was listening.
That's okay.
One more question about BLM. The movement sprouted from calls for police reform, and I'm just curious to know, is this a law enforcement issue that we're talking about, or is it one part of a larger issue? Is police reform one part of a larger issue?
It's definitely part of a larger issue. And it's unfortunate that at times the Black Lives Matter movement can be sort of co-opted to be completely about police reform. It is not.
Sure.
Now, we know that the criminal justice system, the law enforcement system in the United States, we all understand how it was built, and we all understand the areas that are that affect certain populations disproportionately in that work. And so there is work to be done there. That is the reform that has to happen. But it is one system. We also need to be looking at higher education systems. We need to be looking at, certainly the criminal justice system. We need to look at environmental issues and how they impact communities of color. So law enforcement and police reform is just one area.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. That segues well into my next question, because I wanted to talk about academics,
Yes.
or education.
Yes.
And I was curious to know what needs to happen to promote equity in education?
Well, listen, this is $1 million question right here.
Sure.
What needs to happen to promote equity in education? Well, I'll tell you, I wish that we had some of the folks who are friends of mine who would really be the ones to speak to that. I think about Dr. Sherry Clark at Eastern University, who heads up their diversity and
Sure.
equity work. She could probably answer that a little bit better. But what I will say needs to happen is, first, we need to be mindful of the experiences of students in institutions of higher education. So there have been incidents like that have happened recently at Gonzaga University. There was a thing, and there was a thing at Eastern Washington University. And so we need to be mindful that when students of color, who are often here for athletics, but there are some here for other reasons too, but primarily athletics, when they
Sure.
come to a region like this, where they don't get to see a lot of people like them, and where people here don't see a lot of people that look like them, there are challenges just baked into that formula automatically. So we need to think about how we are caring for the health and wellness of those students. That's going to be big. Also, students want to learn from people who look like them as well. And so it is the responsibility of higher ed institutions to be sure that they are diversifying their staff and faculty in a way that represents the students that are served through their institutions.
Sure, sure. How can the business community encourage young Black students to aspire to careers in business?
Listen, this is the truth. And you knew when you invited me on that I was going to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I did.
This is the truth. How you inspire young Black people, men and women, to decide to go into business is to start allowing them to see Black people and people of color excelling in the business. That is what makes it attractive. So if you look at the leadership of most corporations, the leadership of most organizations or institutions, that is usually a pretty white panel. So that is not going to look like what I, as a young Black person, aspire to be. Because that doesn't look like me. I don't even see that. I can't see the correlation at all. So if you want whatever your business industry is to start to look more attractive, then you've got to bring in additional talent that is diverse than what you've always had. And that in itself will actually build a pipeline so that you have more students of color.
Sure. And that advice is probably not exclusive to Spokane. It's
No,
probably,
everywhere.
nationwide.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is not what's new to Spokane, I think, is the boldness to have these kinds of conversations.
Sure.
This is new to Spokane,
Mhm.
but the problem itself is not new, and it's not unique to Spokane. This is nationwide, and it has to change nationwide. I mean, there is no industry that you can look in that, aside from sports, no industry aside from sports, and I would say maybe even some of the art areas,
Entertainment. Sure.
that are not white.
Mhm.
White. Now, that's not saying there's anything wrong with having white leadership. It's not.
Right.
But if you unpack that and say, well, wait a minute, if the last 50 of these leaders have been white, is there something that we are not seeing because we're only looking for that profile?
Mhm.
Is there something that we are missing as an organization? Are we not looking at the same abilities and values that a person of color might bring to the table? Are we expecting a person of color to come to the table and do and look like the 50 white guys that were here before?
Sure.
And if that's the case, then that's not going to be very helpful to your organization. And I would even go so far as to say it's probably going to be harmful to the employees of color that you bring into predominantly white organizations.
Yeah. I guess considering the ratio of Black people to white people in Spokane, and really all brown-skinned people in Spokane. So let's say you have an employer that has 25 people.
Yes.
The chances that there are going to be more than 2 brown
Slim.
Slim. So what could those employers do to make that environment more amenable to brown-skinned people?
First, the very first thing that I would suggest that they do is to just have an authentic awareness that the environment is not amenable to people of color. Let's just start there.
Okay.
It's not. And that is not meaning anyone is in the wrong. It means that it's not an environment that is amenable to people of color, and look at ways to change that. But in order to do that, you have got to be so bold and willing to really unpack the package that you've packed so nicely. You have to be willing to take it off and peel back the layers and actually look at the very foundation of your organization. Look at what practices are in play, what policies are in place. How are you as an organization reaching out to communities outside of the profile to bring folks in? And then once they get there, what is their experience like? I've known many people, many people who have shared this with me about Spokane, and I have my own experience about that, but that when they are in institutions that are primarily white run and white led, that the expectation is that they come in and that they be a white person too. And the reality is, no matter what you do, no matter what I do, I can never be white like you, ever. I'm always going to be Black Kiantha. And so in these areas where there is opportunity for communities of color to have additional people represented in the workforce, you have to make sure that you know that means that there's going to be difference. There's going to be difference, and the organization will be responsible for figuring out how to be inclusive of that difference.
Great. It's all good stuff. I have a lot more questions, but I'm sure you do too. Please type them into our Q&A on the Zoom, and we'll get to them here in a little bit. That is exactly how you type.
Yes.
Just like that.
Yes.
I guess I was curious to know, when you talk about there aren't a lot of people who would describe themselves as racist. Right? There aren't. There aren't a lot of people who would admit their own biases unless
Absolutely.
they're very self-aware. So I can see people feeling a little defensive,
Yes.
or alarmed by some of the things that you just said about inherent bias in a workplace. So what would your response be to that sort of concern or
Sure.
attitude?
Separate yourself personally from the institution. And what I mean by that is, in our world, in the United States, because this is where we are, we should talk about here. In the United States, most of our systems were created from a racist frame, meaning they were meant to really help certain people get where they're going and to keep certain people back from getting to where these people are going, right?
Sure.
That is how it was built. And so because you are a part of a racist institution, separate yourself to say, but that doesn't mean I have to do racist things. I don't have to show up in racist ways. They're not saying that I am the person out burning crosses or I am in the Klan or anything like that. You have to be able to see institutionally what is there, and then see the role that you want to play. Now, you can choose to be silent and just operate within the institutions that exist. Now, that's active racism. That's active racism. But if you can actually pull back and say, I see where that doesn't make sense, and I don't want to be a part of that. So let me just, use my voice, use my power, use my resources to change the way that this structure over here is working for some people.
You know, it's amazing. In talking with you, I was reminded of a documentary that I watched sometime in the last couple of months. I believe it's called Vanguard of a Revolution, about the Black Panther movement.
Mhm.
So it was basically talking about the era from, what would you say, 68 to
Six-
72,
mhm.
somewhere in there, 50 years ago.
Mhm.
And in some ways, it felt like we've made great strides. And in other ways, it felt like we're talking about exactly the same stuff. And so I was just curious as to what your assessment of that is.
The truth is, we have made great strides. We have. Here is an example of that. I live in a community here in Spokane that I'm the only Black family. My household is the only Black household in the community. There was a time that could not have happened.
Sure.
It wouldn't have happened based on redlining. It wouldn't have happened based on it just wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been allowed. So when I say we've made progress, so things are different than they were 50 years ago in that respect. But at the same time, things are very much the same. There are still situations and places that I am not welcome to go. It's just the reality. It's the reality. There are still institutions that don't welcome. When I say I mean people who are like me.
Sure.
There's still institutions that we're not welcome in. There's still leadership positions that we don't have access to. And so when you look at that measurement, then you can say, yeah, things have not changed a lot since 50 years ago. But then again, it's working in tandem because there are those places where it's absolutely changed. You know, the access that our kids have to education. My mother-in-law told me a story about when she was in elementary school, that they would walk to school and they didn't even have shoes. This was in the South. They would walk to school and the school was a room. It was just a room inside of a church. A room inside of a church for all the kids of color to go to school. Now, are our kids inside of a room inside of a church now? No, they're not. However, are there areas where better investments can be made in terms of the education of students of color? Absolutely. Can we work on things like Black children being in this school to prison pipeline? Absolutely. Things have changed, but there is still room to go.
Great. Good. Well, let's talk a little bit more about progress. What does progress look like to you?
Progress to me looks like many different things. This is progress. As simple as this is progress. For the Business Journal to say, you know, we want to have these conversations. We're not sure exactly how that will work, but we want to have them. We want to at least invite you to have them and to call and invite me to come. That's progress.
Sure.
Progress is also when there are lots of people like this in Spokane who are white people who call me and say, or stop me in the street, or, you know, reach out to me to say, Kiantha, I realize that I don't have the answers. I wouldn't have considered, like you said earlier, I wouldn't have considered myself a racist, but I'm learning a little bit more. And so I'm not sure what to do. That's progress. For someone to just simply ask the question and be willing to engage in dialogue about the answer. That is progress. It's not going to look, we're not waking up one day. And I don't know if this is bad for the president of the NAACP to say, but we're not going to wake up one day and everybody's going to be holding hands. Sure. And everybody will understand each other. That's probably not going to happen. Certainly not in my lifetime or yours. Mm-hmm. But what can happen is there can be more people who are holding hands. Sure. Because they understand the value of equity and equality for all people.
Sure. Sure. I mean, it's still people at the end of the day.
That's right.
I mean,
that's right.
Theoretically, you and I could not like each other.
That's right.
But
I do like you.
I do like you too.
Okay. I do like you.
But ideally, it wouldn't be, our races wouldn't be a factor.
That's right. That's right.
A little bit more abstract, but kind of part of the same question is, what does success look like to you?
Mm.
In our lives, in our lifetimes? What does success look like to you?
Success looks like constant conversation, constant exchanging of words, constant exchanging of thoughts and theories, constant being able to be in the same space. That's success. There, everything else is easy peasy. Let's just get in the same room. Let's be willing to hear what other people have experienced and what other people have to say. And I say that, and I want to clarify that it is not just, I want white people to be able to get in the room and hear what Black people have experienced or people of color have experienced. We want to hear what you've experienced as well, certainly, because we don't understand the way in which your world has presented itself.
Sure.
We know the impact of your world, but we didn't walk in it. It's not the same street. It's almost like a parallel universe. And so being able to just be in space together, to listen to each other's understanding and experiences, that's success. If we can get there, if we can get there as a city, just the city of Spokane, if we can get there as a city, we can change our region, and then we can change our nation based on how far we are able to get right here in Spokane. And I'm hopeful for it. I'm hopeful. If not, I couldn't be here. Yeah, I couldn't be here. If I didn't think it was possible, I could not be here.
It's possible.
I think so too. I think so too.
How are we doing on time? Do we have any questions yet?
I love the questions.
Yes, we do. We've got more questions than we probably will have time for, but we'll see what we can do. So our first question is from Lars Gilberts, and he asked, could you share, Kiantha, could you share how you have seen Spokane Coeur d'Alene's demographics and reputation impact our ability to recruit and keep talent for business or business?
That's a great question, Lars. I will tell you this, and this is reality and truth. People do know the history of Coeur d'Alene. They know the history of Idaho. They know the history of Eastern Washington. And so that is a barrier to getting folks here to diversify workforces and to change the outlook that people have when they think about coming here to Eastern Washington. How that changes happens over time. I can tell you some things that get in the way of that change. When we see protests and marches where people are carrying semi-automatic guns in public, that probably doesn't say welcome to Spokane or welcome to Idaho very well. Now, those are things that we can think about the impact, and that's not saying that people don't have a right to bear arms. Of course you do, but we have to think about the way in which we do it and the history that our area already carries, and know that when we do things like that, it impacts new folks being able to come in. And I would say it impacts new employers wanting to come into our region as well, because if they're coming from, let's say, a California, then they likely have a workforce that is very diverse. And so that's not going to work for them to come to a place that is not diverse at all, or that allows people from diverse cultures to feel fear in living here.
Next question is from John Maroney. Kiantha, I'm curious if you would be willing to share your thoughts on reparations. After reading the, I'm going to get this wrong, Ta-Nehisi Coates article about it, I found it super compelling, and I'm curious about what you think about it as a societal concept. Also, thanks for all you do for Spokane and for the surrounding area.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. So I have two thoughts about reparations. For one, if you talk specifically about reparations for people of color, so for Black people in particular, I think should we have them? Sure, but you can't stop there, because all minority cultures really require some reparations of some sort. So if you're willing to open up the bag and really level out the field and provide reparations to those who have suffered, then know that that's going to be more than Black folks. That's going to be all communities of color. Yeah.
And this one from Nellie Swartz, it's a little longer one, so hang tough with me. I am a white woman in a business that is very positive, family-oriented, and small, about 50 employees. However, I do not feel like there have been conversations about how to combat things like microaggressions or increasing diversity within the company. I don't think there are issues per se, but since I have experienced microaggressions regarding sexism, I'm sure that there are things happening under the radar racially as well. How do you advise we bring up and introduce conversations like that with my superiors in a way that elevates the voices of the people of color in our community?
Before you answer,
Yeah.
would you give us an example of a microaggression? Because I'm not convinced that everybody is going to know what that is, or a definition, if not an example.
I'll give you an example. And this is something that I will bet money that people would not see this as a microaggression. They don't even realize this when they say it. I have heard it my entire life, my entire adult career. You're very articulate.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example.
You're very articulate. Now, you are only saying you are very articulate, 4 words. But when you say that to a person of color, we hear a whole bunch of other words, like, we didn't expect you to be articulate. How did you get articulate? Most of you are not articulate. Those are all of the things that come in that loaded 4-word statement. So when we say things like that, those are microaggressions. They really are. So Nellie, and back to your question of, how do you bring it up? This, and this may not be everyone's approach, Nellie, but I'll tell you, this is my approach. Gently. You don't vilify people. That's not the way to have the conversations. It's really saying, we should talk about these things, and we probably won't know how to talk about them properly. We probably will say something wrong, but we still have to talk about it. We still have to talk about it. Even if it doesn't come out in a neat package, we have to talk about it. And I, Nellie, am willing to put myself in the room at the table and have the conversations. That's where you start. And then when people see you doing it, then more people will become more comfortable with doing it. And then you invite people in to come and talk to your organization. Call me. If I'm not busy, I'll come by. Yeah, that's the way.
The next question, what one thing would you do, or would you like to see partners and advocates do to make Spokane a more anti-racist community?
I'd like to see partners and advocates just simply repeat that message over and over again. Make it part of your institution in the same way that you value and repeat your organization's mission statement or your organization's vision statement. Make that statement equally as important as those. That's what I'd like to see. I don't think it's that complicated. It's pretty simple, actually.
Sure.
Yeah.
And from Cindy McMullen.
Hi, Cindy.
How can white people identify racist aspects of our business and community without imposing on the BIPOC community to point them out to us?
That's a good question. And actually, so there's 2 answers. On the one hand, I understand what you're saying, like, how do we not expect that BIPOC communities are the ones who lead the work, who lead the conversations, who are doing the heavy lift? I understand that, and to a certain extent that is true. However, most institutions probably require the voice of BIPOC communities in those conversations as well. And so on that hand, I say you do need to have some BIPOC folks there. What I would say is don't, what's the word they use? Don't co-op the movement. Don't co-opt the movement. So if you want to support BIPOC communities, then come in as a support. Don't come in to run the community. Don't come in and need to be the head of the community or the institution or the work or whatever. Be willing to come in and play a supporting role. That's the way you do it.
And from April Anderson, what are some places employers can search for applicants that are more diverse? I think we get the same results when we only post positions on a couple of websites, and that is it.
Believe it or not, in a region like here, and hi, April, in a region like Eastern Washington or the Inland Northwest, you're really going to have to post outside of the Inland Northwest, because here you're going to keep getting the same profile. Remember, we talked about the profile. We're going to get the same profile if we are looking to do workforce development from our higher ed institutions that are predominantly white. Well, then you're going to get predominantly white applicants to those jobs. You have to go outside of your normal way. And the other thing I would say is consider, and this would be good for all organizations, consider that there might be other things that are equally as important to your line of business that may not be in the conventional profile that we talked about. There are some other things that are of value, but if you only look for this, you're going to miss lots of other people and therefore impact your workforce changing.
From David Troike, how many members does the Spokane NAACP have, and how does the black-white ratio compare to our total population?
David, good question, David. Good question. So I just learned this recently. We had a meeting that had all of the presidents for the NAACPs here in Washington State. There's a regional conference, which is Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. And in Washington State, we have, I believe, 6 different NAACP chapters and branches. So there is Tacoma, there's Seattle King County, there's Snohomish, there is I think Bremerton has a chapter. Anyway, Spokane is the largest NAACP chapter of all of the chapters in Washington State. Spokane. We have the largest NAACP chapter. You wouldn't think that. That's because I didn't think that. It was news to me. And in terms of the ratio of white versus BIPOC people involved in the NAACP, I would say there's probably more white people in our NAACP here than other places around the state. But again, that goes back to that 89% white population versus 2% African American and 2% Native American or Indigenous. So it goes back to that math. So when you look at those numbers, then that's always going to tell you kind of what the makeup is going to be. You're going to have a lot of white members. And I'll tell you, there are still folks that ask me today, can white people be members of the NAACP? And I say, absolutely, absolutely. Without white members, we would be in a bit of we'd be in the corner. We'd be in the corner. So yes, we'd love to have members in our organization that just believe in equality. That's what you have to do to be a member of the NAACP. Believe in equality and be willing to do the work. Simple as that.
From Kayleen Woodward, how do we recruit people of color intentionally in our organization?
Kayleen, you have to go outside Spokane. because they are not here. We are not here. People of color are not here. Again, it's 2%. So if you look at that 2% and you were to break down that number, that is not going to be 2% of professional skilled or professional level or educated Black people. That's everybody included. Just like you have everybody in the white community, you have everybody in the Black community or communities of color. So if you really want that, you are likely going to have to recruit from other places. And this is the free caveat I'm gonna give you. You might need to send people that look like the people that you want to come as the recruiters. That might be helpful, which means that you have some work that your organization can do even now to start to do the internal work to get people to come in of color and to till the soil so that they're okay once they get here. Because I told you that can be just as bad. If your organization is not ready, that's just as harmful. Yeah.
From Ariel McClare, I've noticed when I have conversations with businesses about diversity, they tend to say, we just don't have the time. Any advice on how to get employers more involved in their workforces?
I hear that. I do hear that organizations just don't have the time. And here is what I say to an organization that clearly they are driven by time, driven by KPIs and outcomes, like that is the driver. My first suggestion would be to consider shifting your driver. Because if your driver becomes, and I talk about this in my book that I'm trying to finish, Soulful Leadership, but if your driver becomes about people, then you do the work, you put the investment in on the people, because that actually is going to get you the results that you want. People will work harder if they're more comfortable. If they feel cared for, people will work harder. If a work environment, a workforce is diverse, people work better together. You get more creative thinking, you get more synergies. Like, that is the way to go. So when you hear an organization say, I don't have the time, then that just means that it's probably a conversation that the board of directors and the key stakeholders need to be having about what is the driver for the work.
So we have time only for a couple more questions. What kind of support does the NAACP in Spokane need from white folks in Spokane? This is from Jean Richardson.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jean, for asking that question. The number one support that we need is for you to join the NAACP. Join the NAACP. We need members of the NAACP. We need businesses that are members. And here is the value of becoming a member, a business organization becoming a corporate member of the NAACP. One, you have immediate access to resources that are available to your company, to your staff, to your workforce through the NAACP. So you're linked right in with the folks that can provide training for you, that can assist you with developing your own personal equity plan. So that's first. The second value is that you have now become an organization, a business that publicly is saying, we believe in equity as well. And that is what we represent. So if you go back a couple questions ago to, well, how do we bring in more diverse workforce? Well, show them that you're a company that believes in equity and that believes in values, diversity, and inclusion. That's one way to also increase your workforce.
Okay, one last question. And by the way, we will collect the remaining questions and we'll make sure we get them to Kiantha, and we'll see if we can get you answers. Sorry, we don't have time for all of them. But here's one last final question. Some communities struggle with, I believe it's redefining or overt racism or even stereotyping, et cetera. What is the largest barrier to equity for people of color in Spokane?
The largest barrier to equity, education. Education is the largest barrier to equity. Equality is the largest, just seeing people who are not like you, who are not from the place you're from, who has maybe not had the experiences that you've had, being able to see them as whole and see them in the completeness of their humanity in the same way that you are seen and that you need to be seen, being able to see people of color, BIPOC communities in the exact same way. And it's wonderful that, you know, those of you who are businesses who have tuned in today, that you are even willing to be a part of this conversation. This is a start. This is a start. So for those of you who are here, I'm excited that you decided to come on and have the conversation with us, and commit to continuing to have the conversation, commit to continuing, commit to aligning your business, your organization, your agency to the work that the NAACP is doing, because it is simply making everyone's life as valuable as everyone else's. It's simple as that.
Well, thank you for coming today.
You're welcome, Lynn.
On camera, off camera, let's do it again sometime.
We have to.
Yeah.
Can it involve bread? Because I really am a fan of bread.
It can have bread.
Bread can get me to a meeting faster than anything else.
So noted.
Okay,
So noted.
very good. Thank you
Yeah.
for having
If it
me.
has some like mozzarella and some
Mhm,
red sauce on it, that work too?
No red sauce, but definitely cheese. If you put cheese, I'm staying the night. Yeah, cheese, you got me. I'm locked and loaded with cheese. But yeah, I'd love to do that. And I'd love to support the other businesses, however, however we can, however I personally can, or those who are involved with our organization. We have an amazing leadership team, and they are coming from all different places in the workforce. So from education to entrepreneurship, all different places. And so we have the right folks and we can put the right team together to support organizations. And we'd be happy to do that.
Great. Well, thanks again.
You're welcome.
Thank you to you. Thank you to Canopy Credit Union for sponsoring us today. And to all our viewers, please travel safe. We'll see you soon. Thanks.